So I look around the room, it looks like we've got, hey Kelly,
Hi.
hi Tracy. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Do we have Matt and Jim joining us today?
I don't believe we heard from them.
Okay,
Oh, hang on. Matt's waiting to come in.
Kelly, I'll be leaving at 3:15. I have another commitment at that time.
okay, great. So welcome, Matt.
Yeah.
Starting out to be a very big meeting.
You're very popular, Kelly. You didn't know
Oh, I
that.
don't know about that. It's because I'm the only one with snow today, I think, maybe. Maybe that's
Oh,
what the deal is.
it is
Our
so
8 inches
windy.
isn't adding up too much. It's melting on impact, so I'm
Yeah,
glad about that.
you are? I never thought there was a day that you weren't happy to have snow.
Well, just I start getting a little bit tired of it right about now. I think we should just so that we don't we should just remove the word spring in our seasons up here.
Yeah,
Change it to mud.
yeah.
There we go.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Kelly. I'm another interloper here.
How you doing, Roger?
Good. How are you?
Good.
It's sunny and warm, and it's 80 degrees in Brunswick. It's a beautiful day.
It is
Yeah.
it's windy and horrible. Gale force winds out there.
Yeah.
I
So I
think we're
think
ready whenever you are, Kelly.
We are ready. Okay, great. So I've already got lost in my paperwork here. I'm going to call the investment committee to order and turn it over to you, Ellen, if you will, to take a roll call. Thank you.
Certainly. Trustee Donnelly,
Present.
trustee Gardner,
Present.
trustee McMahon,
Present.
trustee Martin. Oops, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm on mute. There we go. Present.
Trustee Martin.
Present.
Okay, we are all set, and we do expect trustee Bartholomew around 3 o'clock.
Okay, great. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for making the time to come to this important meeting. We have time constraints today. Trustee Bartholomew had another commitment, and he's going to be joining us at 3 o'clock. And Trustee Gardner has to leave at 3:15. And both have expressed desire to be present for the for Article 1, the vote. So basically, what tab 1, the fossil fuel divestment actions and goals, basically wanted to just go over a few things and thank everybody for all the time that was invested into this, to what we're looking at and looking to vote for today. The changes, actually, before we even get into that, I'd like to read through it step by step. I know everybody's had a chance to look at it, just go over the background. So we want to meet our commitment to address climate change and our portfolio's objectives. The University of Maine system has set forward action steps and goals with understanding that at all times, the Board of Trustees acting through the investment committee will act in accordance with sound criteria and consistent with its fiduciary obligations. So we worked extensively on short-term actions and long-term actions, and that's thanks to everybody on this call here that put in that brought input forward. So our short-term actions, as of May 31st, 2022, University of Maine system will divest from direct fossil fuel investments. So 2 points under there: divest from all direct equity and fixed income investments in fossil fuels by May 31st, 2022. And second bullet point, to make no new direct investments in fossil fuels. Our long-term goals: divest from actively managed, commingled, and mutual fund fossil fuels investments by 2030. The investment committee will monitor actively managed, commingled, and mutual fund fossil fuels exposure, and the growth of fossil fuel-free alternative investment funds. Assess investment managers with regard to their commitment to sustainable and fossil fuel-free investments, and when prudent and appropriate, select managers with such strategies, and select managers who meet the UMS risk, return, diversification, and fiduciary goals while being mindful of ESG and climate goals. So the points that that I wanted to go over. Changes to the investment guidelines are within the purview of the investment committee, and we have met several times to discuss the adjustment to these guidelines to include divestment from fossil fuels. A great deal of input and feedback have been received from committee members, and I'm thankful for all of you on the call for doing that, because everybody that's been involved seems to be present. The fossil fuel divestment action and goals before the committee reflects a collaborative effort informed by considerable research, dialogue, and feedback. The short-term actions and long-term actions reflect our effort to balance varying concerns, keeping with sound investment principles and consistent with our fiduciary responsibilities. And as at times during some of these meetings, it was always difficult, very difficult to just go one way or the other, because we have that fiduciary responsibility. So there was a lot of time and effort into this. The committee acknowledges the passion that everyone has for this topic and extends its thanks to all those who have worked on the initiative. The investment committee and the University of Maine system should be proud that we have led our peers when we have divested of coal and when we adopted the strategy that applies environmental, social, and governance factors in the investment decision making. We are again at the forefront as we adopt divestment actions and goals. Our efforts to continue to demonstrate our strong commitment to addressing climate change and portfolio objectives. So at this time, I'd like to call on the committee members to speak on what we're voting on today. If you have any comments, concerns on the process, the final product. So if anybody wants to step up on the committee and just some comments.
Sure.
Trustee
Sure.
Gardner?
Yeah, I just would echo your comments you just made earlier. There's been a tremendous amount of discussion and heart and thought and looking at how best to address the balance between the fiduciary responsibility and also be leading in terms of our climate policies and our desire to move away from fossil fuels. And I think the committee has done a good job of trying to find that appropriate ground that works for that goal. I also recognize that it's probably imperfect, and if we went around to everybody have a slightly different version of what they'd like to see. But I think we've come to a place where it certainly makes the right statement and moves us in the right direction from my point of view. And I'm very comfortable with the way it came out.
Thank you, Trustee Gardner. Anybody else from the
Madam Chair.
committee that would like to? Trustee Donnelly?
First, I want to thank you for leading us through this process. I know you've taken a lot of time and put a lot of thought into this, and recognizing that this is what you do for a career. Really appreciate you lending your expertise to the committee and to the board to help us come to a fiduciary, responsibly met way of also addressing direct investments in fossil fuels and how what we invest in and how it affects climate change and the future of our planet and our country. So it's no small feat to walk through all of those factors and find a way to get there that is prudent and forward-looking. So thank you for that. And I'll pass that along on to all of the committee members who put the time and thought into it to share thoughts with each other. And I'll also thank the students who came to more than a couple of meetings to share their research and their work on how the direct investment might affect the way things look in the future. And most of them did a really good job on pulling down homework out of the finances, looking at what stocks were doing, and really did a pretty thorough job. And there was also, I think, I should acknowledge that there's a real emotion that is also present in this discussion. And I thought, for the most part, bearing in mind that that emotion is there, there was I'd say except maybe one, very respectful dialogue on this, and I think that's also really to be recognized for the students and the committee members on the commitment that we're doing, and also to doing so in a way that hopefully our nation would understand that you can have a dialogue about things and work your way to a good solution, and remain respectful of one another. And so I'll say for my part, directly, I think it's looking at what we're directly invested in, when we can get out of it, and how we could do so over a short time period without causing harm to the investments of the universities is a really great thing. And then to take the next step of changing the policy so it can't happen, no more direct investments will be there. And also want to recognize, as you started with your comments, that most of the colleges and universities that we're reading about now are playing catch up for what we've been doing for more than 10 years on our socially responsible way of looking at how we invest the university's funds. And with our investment guidance and our expertise from our advisors, we've been able to do a really good job of staying within a de minimis amount, which is the aspiration of most of the colleges and universities we're reading about today. And so I also want to congratulate the professionals who work at the University of Maine system that have guided us to that place, so that we can take this next step in that commitment. And so I'm proud of what I think we'll be voting on here shortly. I think it makes a loud statement on who we are as a university and what we're committed to. And I'm looking forward to casting my vote.
Thank you, Trustee Donnelly. Very nice comments. Anyone else on the committee that would like to speak?
Madam Chair.
Trustee McMahon?
The one issue that I think we don't emphasize enough, although I agree with the written policy, is this dichotomy between our social responsibility and our fiduciary obligation. It's not well known, I don't think, but investments in fossil fuels until about a year ago, plus or minus, was actually a losing investment. You were better off not being in fossil fuels. However, if you look at the investment universe since the beginning of January, there's one fossil fuel company, Chevron, in the top 30 in the Dow Jones Index. Chevron is by far the leader in terms of gains over that period of time. I think I'm correct in saying that the $1,000 in Chevron at January 1 is worth $1,400 and something now, and the next closest is about $1,100. So we've always got to be mindful that, yes, and I am 110% in favor of climate change, and I can tell you from a familial perspective, I bought a hybrid vehicle. I compost 365 days a year. We actually took our clothes dryer out because we were concerned about the energy usage with a clothes dryer. And we have a multi-generational household, including a teenager. And if you've ever tried to take the dryer out of a house with a teenager, you'll know you've got to have a fairly good commitment to climate change to even venture to do that. But we succeeded, and we've educated the teenager, and we've educated the teenager's parents. So I am 100% committed. I just want to make sure that everybody's aware that there's a balance, and that the balance is the fiduciary obligation we have to the beneficiaries of our pension plan, to the beneficiaries of the stabilization fund, the beneficiaries of income from endowments for student grants, loans, whatever else there is. So there is this balancing act, and I commend the language that we have there, but I think it's something that we need to keep in mind.
Thank you, Trustee McMahon, for those comments. Any other committee members that would like to speak?
Trustee Bartholomew is joining now. If you want to give it just a second to see if he has anything.
Welcome, Trustee Bartholomew. We're putting you on the hot seat. We're discussing tab 1, the investment statement, and wanted to know if you wanted to comment on the statement as proposed for today's vote.
Yeah, I think thank you, Kelly, and I appreciate it. And I do apologize for my tardiness attending this meeting today. And there was a few items on for my comment, and that was much what I've read here is that the statement really represents a consensus opinion of not just the subcommittee, but almost the board. And I think if we're going to release a statement like this, we really would like to bring it to a board vote. I think the preamble, we can get there with it. I really would like to include it, but if it's an opinion where we have to just verbally say it in front of this, or to provide context for our audience, whether that's students, staff, or faculty, or community, we can probably get to that consideration. In terms of the statement, though, I feel pretty adamant that we want that to be a vote of the trustees, not just subcommittee. Those are my thoughts, Kelly.
Okay. So I believe today what we're doing is we're voting on the article. That would be a separate item, I believe, that Chair Gardner, you probably take up in regards to how that's presented. Traditionally, when we look at issues like changes to the investment guidelines are within the purview of the investment committee. So it's something that we can discuss. It's definitely, I don't believe there's any anything in the vote today that would. Am I reading that correctly? The vote is pretty much on the statement, and then those issues can be taken after. Correct, Chair Gardner?
I'm sitting here reading the resolution as written. For the board to consider anything, this committee needs to first pass it anyway. So to the question that you just asked, Kelly, I believe what we would need first is for this committee to vote on this resolution, and then I think we'd have to defer on how it goes before the board. I'm not prepared at this minute. Yeah.
My guess is we could pull it off the consent agenda and discuss it.
Yeah.
And have people make comments. Would be the way it would normally go. But we'll defer to our parliamentarian, Ellen, and you, and when you're prep meeting for the next board meeting, I'm sure you'll walk through
Yeah.
that.
So Tracy, did you have something to?
Yes, if you don't mind.
Yep, go right ahead.
Trustee Bartholomew, when you speak about this statement, just to be clear, the action item for vote today is just the portion related to the short-term actions and long-term goals. And the portion that has the more extensive statement that the committee had the opportunity to review is not part of the action today. So I'm not sure if which one you were referring to, and if that would make a difference in what we're voting on today. One is a subset of the other. The statement goes beyond that. We didn't feel that was appropriate for vote at the investment committee, but rather just the portion relating to the investment policy.
Yeah, and I think just some additional clarity and assurance on the preamble, before I'd really be in supportive of this.
Okay.
What our next action items out of subcommittee on this are.
All right. Thank you for your comments, Trustee Bartholomew. Any other, we'll go to about Jim, Matt, do you have any comments on the statement as written?
Just a quick comment. I can't put it any better than Trustee McMahon said, but I think it's important to note here that through this whole process, there are probably a few of us who aren't personally fully in support of doing what we can to limit climate change and reduce this type of exposure. But from a fiduciary perspective, there are real limits on what we can do and still meet that fiduciary obligation. And I think that the language as we've gotten to here, particularly under the long-term goals, basically does a nice job of towing that line between those two somewhat competing objectives. We've got, I think, good words in there. We've got words like prudent and appropriate. I think hopefully the point gets across that we're trying to do both as best we can.
Thank you, Matt.
I'd echo
Jim,
Matt and in that way, and just add on, as a firm who for about 4.5 years now has been pretty actively practicing divestiture and fossil fuel intensive companies, we've really come to a fairly broad consensus with our investment committee that beyond any ESG considerations, we're seeing it more and more as a declining industry, and one that I think from a purely investment prudence standpoint makes sense. The last quarter be damned. So,
yeah. Thank you. And now I'm going to ask anyone that's not on the committee if you'd like to speak. We just need to be mindful that we need to put this out for a vote before Trustee Gardner. You have to leave. You have a hard stop at 3:15, correct?
Correct.
So
5 minutes from now.
we have 5 minutes for non-committee members in the Zoom room that would like to speak to the investment statement.
Kelly, I had my hand up.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see your hand. Go ahead, Trustee Cates.
Thanks, Trustee Martin. And first of all, I'll be brief, but try to be brief. Thanks for all of your hard work on this. And I appreciate the expertise on this committee far beyond anything I know about this area. I depend on other people with my meager retirement to help me with this, and I appreciate all your hard work. Having said that, a couple of points. One, I guess I'm confused now on what it is you're being asked to vote on. I've got a one-page document entitled Managed Investment Pool, Operating Fund and Pension Fund Fossil Fuel Divestment Statement. And it's now my understanding you're only going to vote on the last 30% of that page, which starts with short-term actions. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's good, because I have a real just process problem with the board, well, excuse me, with the committee essentially announcing a position of the Board of Trustees when the full board hasn't weighed in. That's why I appreciate that. The other problem I have specifically is with the long-term goal of full divestment by year 2030, for a number of reasons. And I recognize the absolute obligation of this committee and the board itself to recognize its fiduciary duties. I've also am told and think I know that fossil fuel investments are no better or no worse on return than other kinds of investments over the last several years. And now we're hearing today, if other than the last quarter, probably not as good. So it doesn't seem to be a violation of our fiduciary duty to get out of a class of investments which is not performing any better than other kinds of investments are. Secondly, 2030 is a long ways away. And I know that the world has to change. I know that more investment managers need to start working harder on divesting fossil fuels from their portfolios. I get that. But I believe there are some now. And the more pressure that people like us and institutions like us place on them to get the heck out of fossil fuels, the quicker that those managers will do so. 2030 is a lifetime away. I've listened to those students just as you have, and I'm very concerned about the fact of the world we're leaving to them, but more concerned from a selfish perspective on the world that we are leaving to our grandchildren. And I have 4, I know many people here have grandchildren. And I'm not going to be able to justify to them a board position which says, oh, we're all in favor of divestment and we'll get around to it sometime in the next 8 years. That's too long a horizon, it seems to me. It certainly is not going to satisfy the students who have been so earnest in coming before us, nor do I think it should satisfy them. I don't think it should satisfy us. We're setting a goal here after all. I think the goal should be far shorter, perhaps 2026 at the very longest. And we should push our counselors to look hard for those managers to get us there. And if our counselors don't do it, we should get different counselors. And if the funds that we're invested in don't do it, we should look for other funds. And I am not convinced that those funds won't exist sometime in the next 4 years. So I guess I characterize myself as a real hawk on this issue, but I think that that's our primary obligation. You know, I appreciate ESG, the social part of it, the governance part of it, all really, really important. But nothing is as important as climate change. Everything I read, and I suggest everything you read, says we are being too incremental. We're not going quickly enough, and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will pay the price for our incrementalism. This is the one chance all of us have beyond our own personal lives. I admit I still have a dryer to have some impact on it, and I urge us to move more quickly. That's my objection to the long-term goals. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Trustee Cates. We've got a couple minutes with Trustee Gardner on the line, so I'd like to move the text of the proposed resolution or have somebody move that the Board of Trustees acting through the Investment Committee approves the short-term actions and the long-term actions regarding divestment from fossil fuels, while at all times acting in accordance with sound investment criteria and consistent with its fiduciary responsibilities. Do I have a motion from the committee?
So moved.
So moved by Trustee
So
Donald.
moved.
Second. Second by Trustee Gardner. And Ellen, I'll pass it to you for a roll call.
Certainly. So just to be clear, this is tab 1 in the Investment Committee meeting materials. It is within the purview of the Investment Committee, so it will not be going forward to the board. Trustee Bartholomew.
No.
Trustee Donnelly,
Yes.
trustee Gardner,
Yes.
trustee McMahon,
Yes.
trustee Martin.
Yes,
The motion is carried.
Madam Chair, could I ask a question?
yes.
Thank you. I heard what Ellen just said. What would the mechanism be, and perhaps this is a question for the chair, to bring this matter to the board for a more full discussion?
We plan to have this as a discussion item at the board meeting. The question is, does the board have a vote on changing the investment committee's policy? At this point in time, that's not the way we're organized or set up to do that. We'll need to confer on that some more.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I understand. And my reason for saying that, Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
is that I have no interest or expertise or help for anyone on what an investment policy ought to look like. But it seems to me that a question as fundamental as fossil fuel divestment ought to be a discussion for full board consideration.
Yeah, I hear you.
And Mark, can I just add, I also think for the fact that this is a controversial area and that we want to say that we've heard the students, I think to have that preamble attached to this
Yes.
and be something we vote on is fundamental to the other part of our work, which is
Yes.
make sure we answer the public relations issue.
Yeah, I hear you all. I need to work through the parliamentarian here and make sure we understand the right processes and steps here before we decide how we go further with this at this point. Today, today the investment committee had to made a decision. They've made it, but we'll confer on what the next steps are beyond this.
Right.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll just add, it's this is frozen for a while, and in order to move the discussion forward, this is the first step to formalizing the language, getting it in that form so it can go forward. We've had the students coming to us, and we've had this in investment committee, because this is where the committee work is, where things are done, and then it floats up to the full board. And so this is the first step, and then the second part, tab 2, I think, will be the part that's in front of the full board that we could have the discussion, and Mark can talk about what the preamble or this piece of the investment is in regard to that. But without this action, it gets hard to move to do the board would be very, very unwieldy if it were a committee of the whole all the time.
Thank you. Trustee Rotundo?
Thank you. First, I want to thank the committee for its terrific work on this and for your leadership, Kelly. I just would like to say that with something of this importance, that I think that the policy should be voted upon by the entire board, because this is really significant policy. And it's one that I think it's important for the entire board to be able to weigh in on. So thank you. Thank you all for your work.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Anyone else?
Madam Chair, just as a matter of procedure, my understanding is that if an item's on the consent agenda, that any one trustee can move that be taken off the consent agenda. Am I correct in my understanding?
That is true. If it's an item that gets forwarded to the board, this is within the purview of the investment committee. So it would not, this particular action item would not go forward on the agenda for board action in May.
Okay.
But we could, when we do the piece that is on the board, discuss this and have it as part of that discussion that the investment committee took this action and this is new policy without it being a vote. It's already, the vote here today is the vote. And then it could be part of the discussion on the larger item when we bring up tab 2, which is a board vote, right?
Tab 2 is not a board vote. Tab 2 is within the jurisdiction of the investment committee.
Okay. So we will we'll go back to Mark's initial comment, I guess, and let him err on
We'll do
how to
some-
bring this up.
Right. But the message has been heard. We'll figure something out here, but we needed to have this vote done here today, and we'll work our way through it here over the next week or two. What appropriate thing to put before the board.
Thank you. And I recognize that you're 4 minutes over your other commitment.
I know. Sorry, I have to leave, but thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time here today.
Okay, bye.
All right, we'll see you. Any other comments before moving on to tab 2? Okay, so I will I'll hand over the meeting to Kelly Regan, our consultant from NEPC, to discuss the investment guidelines and objectives of the managed investment pool, operating fund, and pension.
Great, thank you, Kelly. I think it would be helpful if I shared my screen as I walk through this to show the changes or the proposed changes in the documents. So I'll do that now. Okay, confirming that you can see my screen. Okay,
Yes.
So here in this section, we have the 3 investment policy statements for the managed investment pool, the operating fund, and the pension fund with red line changes. We red line changes based on the divestment policy that was just approved. So just to know a few things through here related to the divestment policy. This is the managed investment pool. In our primary investment goals section, we did number 6, which talks about the climate change as a long-term material risk, what the fossil fuels are, which are measured by the Carbon Underground 200 list, and a definition about that, and that how the committee will review the exposure there. Additionally, within the document, we have the section called excluded investments. This is the area where when you divested from coal, we added coal divestment here. You can see down here. And I'm trying to make it big so everyone can see. We have listed the excluded investments of that Carbon Underground 200 list. And this is for those direct managers only, which another term for that is separate account managers. Additionally, there is a section in here about commingled funds, and we've added language about how the committee will monitor the actively managed commingled funds, fossil fuel exposure periodically, and engage with those commingled funds on their sustainable investments. And that ties into the divestment statement that was just approved. Additionally, we added in language about investment manager selection. And so this is tying to the fiduciary responsibility of selecting a manager and some criteria around selecting a manager. And at the bottom of it, you'll see here, consideration will be given to investment managers that incorporate ESG into their process and managers that exclude fossil fuel holdings. So when we do new investment manager searches, we'll always be looking at those 2 areas.
Kelly, this is Trustee McMahon. Can you just tell me what you understand by consideration will be given? Does that mean they're given priority? Like, does it mean it's a selection criteria? What's your understanding of that word?
Sure. My understanding from how we work, how NEPC works with you, is that, for example, if you're looking for a new international equity manager, we will propose to you our best ideas for those international equity managers based on our due diligence, our top rated managers, and showcase in there, similarly as we've done in the past, which managers have ESG in their investment process and fossil fuel divestment or no fossil fuel holdings. And we'll show that to the committee. So when you're considering selecting that manager, you've considered those 2 elements into your final decision. That's not to say that one of those managers would necessarily be selected on a number of criteria, that they will be included in the investment manager searches for consideration. When available, I should say, given the universe. The other item in the managed investment pool that we added, and that is it. That's it. So those were the items for the managed investment pool. So I will stop there and see if there's any questions before I move on to the operating fund and the pension fund, as there's a little bit some differences in those two policy statements compared to what you're seeing here.
I don't have any questions, Kelly. I just feel that the policy probably doesn't go far enough. Right? It's still vague to me in terms of, will it get us to a place of complete fossil fuel divestment? And I continue to have concerns. Is it enough? And I guess that's just a statement.
I hear your statement. I will say on the short-term action that this policy statement will accomplish that short-term action by divesting from fossil fuel direct exposure. And it will aid in the goal of the long-term action or long-term goal.
Thank you.
All right, so next we have the operating fund. Everything that I walked through in the managed investment pool is in this policy statement. However, when the University of Maine System Investment Committee approved ESG, that was only approved in the managed investment pool. So we've taken the opportunity, given the statement, to include ESG into the operating fund and the pension fund, in addition to that divestment statement that we just walked through for the managed investment pool. So you'll see here that now primary investment goals for the operating fund is to, you have your ESG statement here, the same ESG statement from the managed investment pool. Additionally, here you have the same climate change statement regarding the fossil fuel divestment and the carbon 200 list. There's no difference in this paragraph compared to the managed investment pool.
And Kelly, do we still have language around do we still have an explanation? Can we have a bit of an explanation, I guess, about the de minimis language if we're moving toward divestment? What specifically have we added for language here?
Sure. So we've adopted the language from the Maine Legislative LD 999, if I have that correct. And this language here in number 8 is pretty much the same as the Maine legislative language. Where the de minimis exposure, you'll see it here. Nothing in this paragraph precludes de minimis exposure in the fund to the stocks, securities, or other obligations of fossil fuels. So we've adopted the state Maine language. I shouldn't say we adopted it, we're proposing it, sorry.
Yep.
I'm scrolling through, so I'm sorry if you're seeing the screen go like this. We have here, so the operating fund, is always divested from coal. We have added the same fossil fuel divestment language for those direct investments. We've added the language in the commingled funds section about monitoring the exposure and engaging with those commingled funds on sustainable investments. We've also added the same investment manager selection language, where at the bottom, it states that consideration will be given to managers that incorporate ESG and exclude fossil fuel holdings. As I was going through these documents and updating the language, this language in here is just something that I noticed was in the managed investment pool and the pension fund, and I wanted to be consistent across the documents. So this is just talking about the investment manager's performance objectives that was missing from this document previously, which has been already approved in the other documents. And then again, here, ESG consideration under investment manager responsibilities. Again, it talks about investment managers incorporating ESG into the process, should provide updates to the committee and things of that nature. So again, we've never approved ESG for the operating fund and pension fund. It's just taking the same language that was included and already approved in the managed investment pool and placing it into this document. Additionally, for the investment consultant, talking about how the investment consultant should be a signatory to the principle for responsible investments and take ESG into consideration. And that is it for the operating fund. So I will stop there and see if there's any questions on the operating fund.
Madam Chair, could I ask a question as a non-committee member? So, or this is not the right time?
Go right ahead.
Thank you. Can you tell us, so what's confusing me, this is going back to Trustee Bartholomew's question. On one hand, we're saying we're totally divesting direct investments this coming month. And I understand what that means. And then there's this de minimis language on page 7, allowing de minimis exposure. And how do those two things fit together? I guess maybe I'm not understanding what de minimis is. I thought zero meant zero.
Can I take a stab at that? So Roger, we invest in some pools of funds, so like a mutual fund, are some of our investments, and they may have a small sliver somewhere in there. So the de minimis is to make sure that the accumulation of all of those other things that are not direct investments. So a direct investment would be like what was mentioned earlier about if we bought Chevron, or the two direct investments we have today where we have bonds that are in fossil fuels. And then we buy some pools or some mutual funds that may have some piece of a fund in there. And if you look at the total accumulation of what we have today, it would fall into that de minimis definition. And until the big funds do complete and a variety of investments, it is hard to hit that. This is where the fiduciary responsibility and our desire to be fully out get a little bit hairier. I believe that as more of the funds come forward, we'll be able to hit these goals sooner. But we also have in our fiduciary is to look at some of the history of the funds that are coming forward to show that they're doing a prudent job and are generating returns that meet our threshold. So that's where the kind of winnowing down beyond where we are now slows down a little bit until the industry has more available funds that are pure. If you were in the earlier educational session, one of the things that came up was there was potentially, if you did purely all out now, there was a substantial loss to the investment portfolio.
No, I understand.
Because there are not enough. So that's where the de minimis comes in, is on the rest of the portfolio.
So you answered my question. So the de minimis applies to the pool funds only, not to our direct investments.
No, the statement says no more direct investments.
I know it does, and that's why I thought there was a conflict with the de minimis language. But you're saying the de minimis language does not apply to direct investments, only to our pooled investments in the funds.
That would be
That's
correct.
as I understand it.
Okay, yeah, that answers that.
Can I follow up?
Yep, go ahead.
Madam Chair, my concern, and I appreciate this, and I think you've come a very long way, and I appreciate very much the language and the movement, and that it's in all funds. The de minimis issue is what the students were talking about last time. So, and I totally appreciate that it will take us a glide path to get out of those funds as Jim explains them. So it will take us to a glide path. So do we assume that the de minimis language goes away in 2030? Or do we always keep de minimis? And I just think the language needs to be tightened to send the right message that this is a strategy as we move toward divestment, but not an ongoing commitment to de minimis spending. Because I think then we're right back where we started from, and that is clearly not the intent of all this good work. I mean, do we need the de minimis language? As we move toward divestment, obviously we can't just do it overnight.
I'll take a stab at that one, Trish. I think what the challenges we face is that the world is evolving to this climate change and trying to help the planet. It's not there, so we have that glide path, and in the meantime, you have to have that de minimis amount because you can't just turn the switch on and off. So that's the reason. And in those commingled funds, I mean, that's not something that can be turned on and off quickly. So you need to have a little bit in that statement so that your statement is factual, because.
Would it say until 2030? I mean, that's where I'm a little confused, Kelly, about whether we assume we'll always have de minimis.
It's actually, we can't even really say that could be doable by 2030, the way the world is today, right? So everybody's moving in that direction, trying to do the best they can, but you could potentially still have a de minimis amount. I mean, everybody's going to change. Everybody on the planet's going to change, so that you don't have these things. It's just one of those things. It's a hard call to make, to say, we could actually say this date, everything's going to be changed over. It's tough. The world is evolving. Go ahead, Trustee Donnelly.
I think we'll get there actually before 2030. But what the minimis language allows you to do is avoid a fire sale. If we hit a date and it's going to be 6 months later or a year later that it actually hits, that you're not pulling the fire sale, get rid of anything that has it in, and have a negative impact on the investment. But the folks who are here today will get, I think we've talked to Kelly about having our annual report on where we are and how things are coming. And so this isn't a one and done discussion, but it avoids us putting in a date. Any date we put in is going to be wrong. I think we can all agree on that. I think in 3 or 4 years, we're going to have really good options. And I think we'll be well before the 2030, but we won't have performance experience with those funds by then. And so I think, if it's 2026, 2028, I bet we're going to have some options to shrink that de minimis amount down. And we'll be able to I won't be on the committee in 6 or 8 years, but in 6 or 8, in between that 4 and 6 or 8 years, the committee will continue to be able to marshal that forward and continue to shrink it. And then have Kelly and her team bring things to us that have the option of no fossil fuel or improved ESG experience in it. So I think we're going to get there faster than the 2030, but I think having the 2030 gives us a goal for the date, and the and the de minimis language gives us the opportunity for that committee at that time to make the decision, is that a fire sale date? But this policy is not a one and done. Roger can come back in 6 months and bring up addressing this, or I can, or any member, if we find that there are other things that we can do to improve it. I think this puts us on the path to get where we want to be. It lays out the language to do so, and does it in a fiscally prudent way to allow us to get there without damaging the investment pool and the performance of it.
Trustee Donnelly. Yeah, and I just wanted to add to that. These investment statements are living documents. as everything evolves, we have a commitment to move towards divestment as the world evolves. And I think a lot of what Trustee Donnelly just said, is proof of where we want to go as things unfold. We have the parameters, and we need to move in that direction. And it's something we've always had, in the years previous to our ESG statement, we've had that effort always to be picking managers that are doing the right thing. And we continue with this new language to even look at it closer, with fossil fuel divestment. So as things evolve, we're moving with it. Matt, you wanted to comment?
No, just one thought here as we're trying to think through this, because it's, I think we were intentional in terms of the short term was an action and the long term was a goal. But it doesn't mean that the goal doesn't have to be centered around taking certain actions. Like with traditional strategic planning, a lot of times you'll set a goal, and then as you work that goal over time, you'll go back and see how much progress you've made versus the goal. It might be that there's some opportunity at the committee or the board level to put some sort of mechanism in place where we do periodically go back and look at what progress we've made versus the long-term goal, and essentially make an assessment of how we've improved and where we are on this continuum of getting to that zero fossil fuels percentage. Just as to keep us all honest, essentially. I mean, we have our best interests, I think, in this, but there's going to be committee turnover. People will change, understanding of what this means might change. So maybe working some sort of, checking back in on progress to the goal mechanism could be helpful.
Thank you, Matt. Those are good points. Anybody else have any comments?
Madam Chair.
Trustee McMahon.
If I could just read briefly to people: administrative procedures and services, finance, divestiture of state funds. And this it deals with the Board of Trustees' main public employees retirement system. Limitation on investment in fossil fuel company. The board, in accordance with sound investment criteria and consistent with fiduciary obligations, may not invest the assets, blah, 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 blah. Nothing in this subsection precludes de minimis exposure of any funds held by the board to the stocks, securities, or other obligations of any fossil fuel company or any subsidiary, affiliate, or parent of any fossil fuel company. So what we're basically doing is mirroring the state guidelines. And I think that's a good place to start, and probably a defensible place to start.
I would just suggest, I think we wanted to go beyond, and I think the resolution that you just passed actually does go beyond the state, but I think we have to consider the fact that the students were focused on de minimis investments. And if the language is in there and that says we're going to continue that without some context about why and that it's a glide path, I think we're inviting trouble we don't need to have. And it's again, grabbing victory from the grabbing defeat from the jaws of victory. So it's just a framing issue, I think, to talk about how far we have come, but that's up to you.
Thank you, Trustee Riley. Go ahead, Kelly.
I was just going to say, if there's no more questions, I just had one last point to make, and I will share my screen again. I'm sharing now the pension fund investment policy statement, and everything I've reviewed with you for the managed investment pool and for the operating fund is included in this investment policy statement. The only difference in the pension fund is this one section on responsibilities, which we've added the statement about how the system follows ERISA as a best practice, given that this is a pension fund, and some guidelines around or responsibilities around the fiduciaries and how to invest solely in the interest of participants and beneficiaries. So just additional language to cover that fiduciary aspect that we've all talked about. So I'll stop there and see if there's any other comments, questions on the policy statements or anything that I've reviewed with you.
My only comment, Kelly, would be that this statement is good. It just doesn't go far enough. Again, I would just echo that. That's my concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Sven.
Any other comments? Hearing none, I will read the text of the proposed resolution that the Board of Trustees, acting through the Investment Committee, approves the updated investment guidelines and objectives for the managed investment pool, the operating fund, and the defined benefit pension plan. Can I have a motion?
Kelly, can I ask one question beforehand? I apologize, I didn't get in quickly enough.
Sure.
This is maybe for the author of this. Is there a reason why the goal of complete divestment by 2030 is not reflected in any of this?
So that's what we were just discussing around the de minimis exposure, that long-term goal.
But if someone picks this up as the policy of the University of Maine system about fossil fuel divestment, nowhere does it say that the goal, at least, is complete divestment by 2030. Some of us may think that's too late, by the way, but whatever it is, it's not in here. And someone would have to search out a separate document to find that. Is there some reason why it doesn't belong in here?
So we investment policy statements, we try to make them broad, and for one of the standpoints of what we were just talking about with the the fire sale of commingled funds and not having to do that. For example, let's say you have 0.2% of exposure in 2030. You have to fire sale that if you have it stated in the document, unless you've updated it.
No, I get it. I assume that's why you use the word goal and not directive. But my question is more to the point of someone from the outside looking to see what the policy of the University of Maine system is on fossil fuel divestment. They're not going to see it in this document. The goal is divestment by 2030, according to the committee's perspective. It's people reading this won't see that. And that's my point. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. Hearing none, I'll just read the text of the proposed resolution again. That the Board of Trustees, acting through the Investment Committee, approves the updated investment guidelines and objectives for the managed investment pool, the operating fund, and the defined benefit pension plan. Can I have a motion?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I would make that motion, and if we could find, I think Trustee Cates's suggestion is a reasonable one. I'd like to find the spot where we could set that our goal is to be fully divested by 2030. In that, I'm not sure exactly where that would fit in here, but I think in the goals, long-term goals of divesting by 2030 regarding, or long-term goals regarding divestment of fossil fuel investments at all times, acting in accordance with sound investment, consistent. Not sure exactly where that fits neatly. But I do think it's a reasonable addition, and I would like for us to include that.
So what, how do we proceed with that? Do we send it back?
No, I think we can add it. I just need to figure out where we add it. And Kelly, Regan, do you have a suggestion on where that might fit in what we just went over?
I think it would fit in the section, I meant the pool's primary investment goals are outlined below. The item 6, where it talks about climate change is a long-term material risk, and it talks about the divestment. The only thing I am struggling with at this point is saying by 2030 and having that contradict the immediate divestment of those direct investments. But I think
So-
that's where it would fit.
So have the fully divested, goal of being fully divested by 2030. And the direct investment is still, that statement stands on its own. And then the de minimis, with, our goal is to be out of the de minimis investments by 2030.
And I think that's the paragraph that it would sit in, is because it's your primary investment goal, where it talks up front in the document about that. If you
Okay.
wanted to add that.
I do. That would be my motion, with that one addition to what Chair Martin just read for the statement.
So do we feel,
If-
go
if-
ahead,
if I
Trustee
could-
McMahon.
If I could add, does it make sense just to add a sentence that says, the committee will review this policy annually, the policy statements annually, and report on progress towards its divestment goals annually to the Board of Trustees? In other words, we don't put anything in there that Kelly was worried about, but we mandate annual review and we mandate annual reporting of progress to goals to the Board of Trustees. Does that satisfy everybody?
I would state here, sorry to interrupt, that on page 1 of the documents, there's a statement that says it is expected that these guidelines will be reviewed at least annually to ensure that it continues to provide effective guidelines for the management of the pool. That's included in the managed investment pool today, which is similar, I think, David, to what you were just describing, except your statement was more specific to the divestment.
Can we just insert there and report annually divestment progress to the Board of Trustees?
You could also say it consistent with the committee's approved divestiture statement report annually on progress of divestiture to the board. And right above that, there's also a place where it says, to this end, the investment guidelines will. You could just add a bullet point that says, remain consistent with the divestiture statement, so that ties this IPS directly to the divestiture statement as a thing that we will do.
Okay.
So let's just sum up what we heard real quick, just for my understanding. So we're saying we're going to add language that says de minimis, we will be out of de minimis holdings by 2030 with a goal of complete by divestment by 2030, and the committee will review it annually. Is that correct?
And report to the Board of Trustees.
The one difference I might say in there, Sven, is you said completely out of de minimis and then a goal of complete divestiture. I think that's the same thing. So we can get rid of part of that. I think it's a goal of being completely divested by 2030. We don't need the first
Including
part.
the de minimis holdings. Yep.
Right. Because that would, de minimis doesn't matter anymore if you're out.
If you can be out.
Right.
That's the thing that, like, we want to, I have personally have issue with being able to draw a line in the sand when if we're not able to do so. So like a goal, an aspiration, but to say that, we're totally out by that date because we feel confident today in 2022 that we could do that, it's a big statement to make.
Well, that's why I think we use the word goal, was as Roger had described it, as we put a goal in of 2030, and that should help us or the committee at that time to avoid having our investment advisors at the time have a must on 2030, January 1st, 2030. If there is 0.1% that's left in there, they have to sell it that day no matter what. The committee at the time can review that and see if it's there or not. But again, I'll say my thought is that the committee 4 years, 5 years from now will have more options than we have today. And working with our investment advisors, we'll be able to push that de minimis number down to near zero before 2030. But I'm with you, Kelly. Yeah, we can think and we can talk about, but until it's in front of us with a performance history, it's a big, bold statement. So I think having the word goal in there gives us some flexibility to do it sooner, and it gives the committee at that time an opportunity to look at that and see if it makes sense. Again, my assertion, and I would bet anybody $1 that we'll be at that level long before 2030.
All right. Thank you. Any other comments? I've got a question for Tracy and for Kelly. Do you feel that this is something we need to bring back to the drawing board because the detail that goes into these statements, do we bring it back out? You feel comfortable going through this, making the changes, bringing it back out to the investment committee at a later date, or do you feel you have an adequate handle to change things on the fly? I just have a little bit of concern. We have to comb through this to make changes if that's what the desire of the committee is. If we vote on something, just making edits while we're here, if we miss something. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, Kelly, that's consistent with what we've had to do in the past, and we know what the changes need to be. I think that's something we could easily accomplish. Normally, I think with the vote to make those changes, except with those changes, I think wouldn't need to necessarily bring it back.
Okay. You think we could vote on it today with the changes that we're requesting?
Yes, that's something we've done in the past.
How do the, Kelly, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, I've heard the 3 comments about the goal of 2030, reviewing it annually and reporting to the Board of Trustees, those 3 items. And it's just about inserting it in the right place of the document where it flows correctly. So I have no problem doing that and submitting it back to you after you voted.
That's my motion.
So we're voting on an edited document that we really haven't seen in front of us. Everybody's fine with that, or?
We're fine with those 3 changes incorporated, yes.
Okay. David, your thoughts on that?
I'm good with it.
You're good with it? Okay. So without hearing, I'll go back to, we have a motion on, did anybody move the motion?
I did with the amendments.
So not very polished on the Roberts rules. How do we do that?
We need a second
We need a second.
on the amended motion from Trustee Donnelly.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, seconded by Trustee McMahon. Ellen? I'll pass it to you for the roll.
Certainly. So we're voting on tab 2 of the investment committee materials, the resolution as amended, as discussed. And this is within the purview of the investment committee. Trustee Bartholomew,
Yes.
trustee Donlin,
Yes.
trustee McMahon,
Yes.
trustee Martin.
Yes.
The motion is carried.
And I guess meeting's adjourned. Thank you for all your time. And we'll see you, I think our next meeting, Ellen, is May 11, I think, or something like, yeah, it's in May sometime. So I'll see you again